The Victoria Cross is the highest award for bravery in war in the Commonwealth. And at the start of World War I, one state could boast that it was home to 1/3 of all the existing Australian VCs, and that state was Tasmania. Mind you, only 6 had been awarded by that time, but it was still a pretty impressive statistic. It may be Australia's smallest state, but Tasmania in war has always punched above its weight. I love the smell of Tassie in the morning, so I'm heading off for Launceston. I'll slip behind the wheel of a high-tech 1919 Lifesaver.
This was an emergency response vehicle.
Go back to school with a 90-year-old undercover spy.
On some missions, we were given a little pill to take.
Poison pill?
Yeah. Fortunately, we never had to use it.
And a huge crowd at the Tour of Duty Roadshow.
Good afternoon, Launceston!
Reveals some heart-stopping moments.
He pulled out this notebook and this bullet fell out.
The bullet had gone through the book. I love Launceston. Sorry, Launceston. It's one of the prettiest towns in Australia. There's Cataract Gorge and the beautifully preserved 19th century facades in town. I mean, every corner reveals its own little time capsule. But when war calls, this little pocket of northern Tasmania has always answered. In World War I, more than 15,000 Tasmanians did their patriotic bit for king, country and empire. I'm in the little village of Evandale, just outside Launceston, which was home to arguably the most famous of them. This is such a beautifully quiet little town. It's the sort of place that wins awards for neatness. Look at this lovely trimmed grass, the old village green. But always here, looking at this statue, there's a crowd of tourists. Where are you lot from?
From the UK.
How are you? Whereabouts?
From Sussex.
Hey, Sussex. Oh, a bit posh down there,
Oh,
isn't
yeah,
it? So presumably you hadn't heard of Harry Murray
No, never before. No.
Mad Harry Murray. Great Harry Murray, as he was also known, because he was the most decorated infantry soldier of the entire First World War. Let's start with a VC in 1917. Had not one but 2 distinguished service orders, a Distinguished Conduct Medal, a French Croix de Guerre, and mentioned in dispatches 4 times. Now add to those 4 medals 7 promotions, 2 on the one day, mind you. But this bloke who landed at Gallipoli as a 35-year-old private was no reckless daredevil. He was polite and shy and quiet. He was a passionate believer in discipline, of strategy, of tactics, and his men seem to have been inspired by him all the time. You know, they would fight harder because they were so confident in themselves once they knew the calibre of leader. Murray's men idolised him. They went wherever he went, and believe me, Harry went everywhere. In 1917, there was this attack on the German lines, and he was in charge of the right flank, and it was freezing cold, and he was really ill. And his men were reduced from 140 down to 48, and he should have left the fighting. But he didn't. He was always seen cheering the guys on, leading the bayonet charges and looking after his men. And for that, he was given the Victoria Cross. In a letter to his sister Annie, Harry described a hand-to-hand struggle with 5 enemy soldiers. One hit me on the head with a knob kerry, but I had a revolver and he didn't get time to hit twice. And the other 4 tried to escape after they saw their comrade fall. Fancy 5 of our fellows running from even 5 Germans. There's no fear of anything like that. What I really love about him most was something that he said after the war was over. He said, "I was always frightened." He said, "I was always frightened, but the only way to combat fear is to walk up to fear, to walk through fear, and to go past it." Extraordinary, heroic man. After the war, the much decorated, much promoted, much loved Lieutenant Colonel never wore his medals, never marched on Anzac Day, and never talked about the war, which is ironic, because if anyone had a story or two to tell, it was the great Harry Murray. So thank you. Give my love to Sussex.
Will do.
And love to all you who aren't from Sussex. Sorry to have interrupted you. Bye. Time for me to leave the small town of Evandale and head for an even smaller town about 100 kilometres east. Population 256. Well, 263 if you count the men made out of wood. Medals can be a really appropriate way to remember someone's heroism, particularly for the families of the fallen. But we have to remember that there are hundreds and thousands of servicemen and women whose stories aren't officially recorded. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they've been forgotten. For instance, here in the little town of Legerwood, in 1918, they decided they wanted to create a memorial to their local war dead. And they wanted it to be something that would last for hundreds of years. On the 15th of October, right here on the railway crossing of the Ringarooma Road, they decided to put up 9 big trees, 7 for each of the local dead from around here, 1 for Gallipoli and 1 for the Anzacs. Sadly, they didn't last for hundreds of years. They didn't even last for 100 years. But what happened next was far more extraordinary. In 2001, the trees were declared dangerous and the council wanted to remove them. But people power saved the day.
The older residents knew that the significance of the trees and stopped them from happening. They was going to chain themselves to the trees to stop them from being fallen. And then we came up with the idea of carving the trees into the likenesses of the soldiers. So we had to research the soldiers, find out who they were and what they did before they went to war.
So just who were these men? This first tree here, that represents Gallipoli and the incredible thirst that the guys must have undergone during the fighting. This fir here, of course, it would have been magnificent originally. It's dedicated to Alan Robert Andrews, who lived around here. He was a farmer. He worked in the sawmill. Another big one here, a massive statement. It's to Private Robert James Jenkins. But which one is Jenkins? Well, I'll tell you, because you wouldn't expect it, I don't think. It's this one here, almost looking as though he's lying back in a boat. Who's he looking at? That's his fiancée, the woman he never got to marry. And if you look all the way down this line, each of the trees tells the very personal story of one young man from around here who died in World War I.
Young Alan Andrews was only 18 when he went overseas, and I can't imagine how hard that would have been for his family.
Yeah.
But he was killed when he was 19, and so we carved him looking towards his mother's farm and waving his hat with his dog by his side. Robert Jenkins, we didn't know anything about him, but 5 of the men were working in the local sawmills, and he was one, and he was engaged to a local girl, Trippy Forsyth. We all knew Trippy, she never married, but we didn't know the story that she didn't marry because her fiancé was killed in World War I and never returned. She actually kept the photograph of him on her dressing table with the engagement ring beside it for the rest of her life.
When we got here this morning, everything was really quiet and we could look at them in peace. But now more and more cars, more and more people have turned up. This must have transformed your little town.
Oh, definitely. No one stopped in Legerwood before because there was nothing here to stop for. The row of trees didn't mean anything. But now that they're carvings and they come here to honour our men, they come here to honour our soldiers.
So everyone around here is really proud of what you've done.
Very, very proud. And it's great to be able to tell the stories of these men to everybody from around the world. And I think that that is so special that because of this memorial, their names have not been forgotten.
When I was a kid, memorials were grey and sombre and stern, everything these trees aren't. Over the next few years, as we reflect on the events of World War I hope towns, cities, villages throughout the world will create memorials like this in their own image. Wouldn't that be a huge step forward? I'm back in the Big Smoke on my way to City Park to road test a relic of a worldwide pandemic that brought fear and loathing from the battlefields of World War I Europe all the way to Little Launceston. Even after the carnage of World War I had stopped, the horror wasn't over. A previously unknown killer disease swept across the world. It was called Spanish flu, and globally they reckon it killed about 50 million people. And although Tasmania was isolated, it certainly wasn't immune, and it had to be prepared. This is one of the preparations. John, this really is a 1919 ambulance, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
A Ford.
It's a Model T Ford. It's the same type of ambulance that we used in the Great War.
So how come it got over here?
Well, Tasmanians saw the impact of the flu on the mainland, and they saw how bad it was. And there was almost paranoia hit. So with a certain amount of surprising foresight, the City Council actually commissioned this ambulance to deal with the coming influx of flu patients.
And Robert, is it easy to drive?
Well, it's fairly easy. You know, I think it's easy because I'm used to it.
Can I have a go?
You can have a go, yes, by all means.
Right now?
Yeah. You put your left pedal down for low gear.
Oh, is this a gear?
And the middle one is reverse gear.
Yeah. Cool.
And the right one is the foot brake.
Right, you ready to go?
Yep. This is a little bit complex. What's the top speed, Robert?
Around about 80k.
That's pretty fast, really, isn't it? Not bad for a Model T, is it? It's hard to imagine now that an old rattler like this might have meant the difference between life and death for a Spanish flu patient. Still, I don't suppose anybody imagined that all those men returning home from the battlefields of Europe could have spread a vicious bug that claimed more victims worldwide than the Great War itself. John, it's great fun driving this around in the park on a sunny day, but it would have been a bit different in 1919, wouldn't it?
It was. There was real worry about this. This was serious, and this was an emergency response vehicle.
To what? What was Spanish flu like?
Well, it was a pretty serious disease. You'd end up with difficulty breathing, and in really serious cases of Spanish flu, pneumonic influenza, the body it's described as turning black to various degrees.
So there must have been some kind of panic going on around here, knowing that this disease was out there in the rest of the world and on the Australian mainland and just coming closer and closer.
It's quite widespread panic. I mean, they were really worried.
So what did people try and do to ward it off?
Well, mostly the treatment just consisted of wrapping people up and putting cold packs on their heads. They recommended strong black coffee and cod liver oil, and one nurse even recommended alcohol as a good treatment for flu.
More than 10,000 Australians died from Spanish flu. Launceston recorded just 31. This relatively small number led some people to believe the Launceston lurgy wasn't the real thing.
They didn't see any cases where people ended up with the blackening effects of pneumonic influenza or Spanish flu.
So it could just have been a coincidence. It could have been ordinary flu, but a particularly nasty version
A
of it.
particularly nasty strain of it. And we don't know to this day.
And all we've got left of the story is this ambulance.
That's right.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing all that with me.
Thank you.
Cheers, John. Bye. Mystery or not, Spanish flu was a major killer back then. Even now, its variant strains still pose a serious risk to 21st century society. My search for Australia's greatest war stories is hitting pay dirt in Launceston. Time to spread the word about one of Tas's bravest men and an event very close to my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you're aware, but this Saturday there's going to be a big history roadshow which we're running about particularly the impact of the First World War on Launceston. So if you'd like to come along, we'd love to see you. But the real reason why I've just leapt up and started shouting around in the middle of a mall is because I wondered whether many of you have heard about a guy called Teddy Sheehan. Does that ring a bell? No? No?
Teddy Sheehan was just 18 years old in October 1942 when his ship, the HMAS Armidale, was part of an ill-fated convoy to evacuate Allied troops from Japanese-occupied Timor.
And it was crazy up there, and the first ship went in, managed to get some troops, headed off back towards Darwin. But then there was just mayhem. The plan went awry, and the Armidale was told to go back out to sea and wait till the next night and then come back in again. Except that it meant that the Armidale was completely vulnerable to attack from Japanese aircraft in daylight. And sure enough, mid-afternoon the next day, the planes came in and the Armidale was hit twice, and it started to sink pretty rapidly, and the order was given to abandon ship. But of course that was a big problem because it meant that the guys in the water were sitting ducks to the bullets from the Japanese planes. But one guy decided not to abandon ship, and that was Teddy Sheehan. He was only 18 years of age. He strapped himself to his machine gun and he began firing at the Japanese. And the guys in the water saw him down 2 planes, even while the ship was sinking. And even when it was under the water, they could still see tracer bullets coming up from under the water, firing up into the air. Even as he drowned, he was a real hero.
100 lives were lost when the Armidale went down, but Teddy's extraordinary sacrifice meant 49 of his crewmates survived.
What was the supreme medal that you think that he might have earned for that act of heroism?
VC.
The Victoria Cross. He was mentioned in dispatches, but he didn't get a VC.
In 2013, a defence tribunal reviewed a number of cases for retrospective Australian VCs, including Teddy's. Although it acknowledged the extraordinary bravery in each instance, it concluded there were no grounds to overturn the original decisions. But Teddy's supporters are still fighting.
Flat white, Gary.
Thank you very much.
You've been working on this campaign for over 25 years now, haven't you?
I have done, and it's been a very long road, knocking on doors, petitions, writing to politicians, anyone that would sort of listen. And I think I'm starting to make a bit of ground. They're starting to know I'm about anyway.
Should we sit down? Why? Why should your uncle get a VC?
He should get a VC because he drew the enemy fire away from his mates, where we were getting strafed in the water. He went back, strapped himself into the Oerlikon gun. He knew then he was going to die. So he gave his life for his country. So I think it's very deserving of a Victoria Cross.
So why doesn't he get one? What did the authorities say?
They're just frightened. They're going to open up a can of worms, and some other people will come forward and want to, for VCs. But if they deserve them, they should get them.
Have many Australian naval personnel received VCs?
Not one. And I don't know why, because they say that they're not man-to-man combat, but I find that very hard to believe.
But there was a British sailor, wasn't there, who got a VC in pretty similar circumstances?
Yes, Jack Mantle.
Jack Mantle.
Jack Mantle. He was very similar to what Teddy did, and he stayed at his pom-pom gun and kept firing at the enemy, and he died at his post, which is what Teddy did, and he got a Victoria Cross, well deserving, I might add, and Teddy didn't.
Well, it's taken you 25 years, probably take you at least another 25, but let's hope you get there in the end.
I'll keep fighting on.
Lead. Yes, ready when you get it? Yep. Yeah, Charlie.
Like most Taswegians, the boys at Scotch Oakburn College are footy mad. Personally, I don't call hand passing a pointy ball that bounces at weird angles footy, but I digress. During World War II, sporting events were often means to drum up patriotic support for the war effort.
It's hard to believe, isn't it, that a group of young men just a little bit older than these could be playing footy one minute and the next minute they're fighting in a full-scale battle. But I guess that's part of the futility of war, which is maybe best epitomised here in Tasmania by the World War II 2nd 40th, or Doomed Battalion, as they were known. This was a group of idealistic young men who joined up at a time when the government had already got too many men and hadn't got enough men to train them. They adopted the Dooms moniker before they'd even left Australia. After a nightmare cross-country journey to Darwin, a dock strike at the port left them under-equipped and poorly prepared. Things were no better when they arrived in Timor to protect Australian air bases from the unstoppable Japanese forces. Your dad was actually there in Timor, wasn't he?
Yes, Tony, he was. He was one of the original 919. They fought for 3 days only in Timor.
This is after the Americans had started to pull out?
Yes, that's right. All the Hudson bombers were sent back to Darwin. They had no air cover.
Rod's dad, Ernie, was part of this detachment known as Sparrow Force. He and his mates from the 2nd 40th were under siege. They had no hope against the Japanese onslaught.
They had 5,000 opposition directly in front of them, 660 paratroopers coming out of the sky, and literally there's 800 men left to fight.
So did they surrender?
They surrendered on the 23rd of February 1942, and from then on it was 3.5 years of internment at the hands of the Japanese.
About 240 men from Ernie's battalion were sent to Japanese POW camps on transport ships. When the Tamahoko Maru was torpedoed and sunk by the USS Tang, 558 POWs died, more than 80 of them from the 2nd 40th. Ernie was in a later convoy on board the Russian Maru. It eventually arrived at its destination, Nagasaki.
My father went into O-Mine, Camp 17, in deplorable conditions, still working for a bowl of rice, a daily ration, walked bootless through snow to the Mitsubishi factory with a greatcoat only, and then back after his shift to their army camp. And that was sometimes a 2-3 kilometre walk.
And then the bomb went off?
The bomb went off. An atomic bomb, 20 kilometres from where they were based. Total devastation except for these tiny little metal chimneys coming out of fireplaces. And my father said it was the most emotionally devastating thing he'd seen. He said it was unimaginable how one person could do this to another race. Just the devastation was unbelievable.
Must have been really difficult for them when they got back to Australia.
My dad was told, basically, when you are demobbed, when you are at the end of your useful military career, which was 1945, you'll live to be 58. So get married, have 2 kids and call it quits.
Did he die at 58?
He did. He died at 58.
You can see why they were called the Dooms Battalion.
You can. Every corner they turned, every country they went through, they were doomed.
It's kind of defiant in a way.
It is, it's defiant, but it also defines them. Not as Sparrow Force, but as Sparrow Force, the Doomed Battalion.
The 2nd 40th story is a very moving one, and I'm not done with it yet. The men from that battalion came from all walks of life. Can you show me where the library is?
Yeah, it's just at the back.
Fine, just on the left then?
Yeah.
Thanks. One of them was a talented young artist here at the Launceston Examiner. This is the stuff I'm after. Now, you might think I'm a bit of a nerd, waxing lyrical about this kind of stuff. It does look a bit boring. But these are archives. This is where the history of your town or city is going to lie. All you've got to do is look into it. Look, April, June 1917, the Exeter Show, whatever that is. January to March 1922. This is the one that I'm after, 1939. These are copies of the Examiner from September 1939. 39. Can you see, in those days, on the front page, you didn't have news. All you had was adverts, lingerie, silks, go shopping, all that kind of stuff. But just a couple of days later, that's September the 2nd, and here we've got September the 4th, VAM! Suddenly all those adverts have disappeared. Britain at war with Germany. Churchill's chosen. Italy expected to be strictly neutral. They got that one wrong, didn't they? Anyway, at that time, there was a young man called Geoffrey Tyson, who was an artist working at the Examiner. This is the kind of thing that he used to create. Isn't that beautiful? It's so innocent, so lovely, isn't it? It's a complete different world. Hold on in your mind to that picture while I tell you the rest of his story. And he was doing this kind of thing too, little comedy adverts. But then the war happened and he became one of the doomed battalion, and he went over to Timor, and then he went to a prisoner of war camp. And while he was there, he started doing drawings of everyday life in the POW camp. Tyson would be moved to 7 different POW camps, each time trying to smuggle his drawings with him. In 1944, he was on board that ill-fated transport ship bound for Nagasaki, the Tamahoko Maru. This is what I'm looking for, I think. Yep, Geoffrey Tyson, prisoner of war camp. So he was on the ship when, bang, it was hit, and it went down really, really quickly. Later on, he said that a lot of his mates who were surrounded him were sucked down into the engine room and were stuck there and couldn't get out. But he found a little metal hatch and he climbed through it, went into the water, struggling, splashing. Eventually, he was rescued and taken to Japan, originally to Nagasaki, and then he worked down a mine until, woof, the atom bombs went off and he knew that he was going to be free. But while he was waiting to go back to Australia, he started doing more drawings of life in the prison of war camp. And what I find so remarkable about these drawings, look at this one too, is how gentle they are. If I'd been stuck in a POW camp, I mean, I would never have survived, but if by some miracle I had, I would be drawing stuff that was angry, that was bitter. I would want to show everybody how horrible everything was. But this one of these guys with these muscles, I mean, it's slightly idealised, isn't it? A lot of people say, actually, they wouldn't have looked like that. They would have been far more skinny by that time. You'd have seen a lot of rib. But in this one, for instance, it's even funny. Look at the look on his face. He's found somewhere to sleep. And this lovely little one of a man squashing a bedbug. It's comedy, isn't it? Anyway, eventually, Geoffrey got back to Australia and he went back and he worked for the Examiner, and then he became a teacher. And he didn't die till he was 75. A lot of them died much younger. He was ill for a lot of his life, but at least he had a fairly long life. But what I always think of when I see these drawings is that throughout all this time, he was still the gentle, sensitive soul who drew that picture of that woman with her arm up in the air and the sea in the background all those years previously, before the war even started. On my walks, I love going along little suburban streets like this and finding stories that you wouldn't expect. This is the perfect example. This house behind this fence was the home of a war hero from the Second World War. He wouldn't tell you that he was a hero because he's a very modest man. Don, come out here. Hiya, mate. Now, if you said the name Don Field to many people, they wouldn't know who you were talking about, would they?
They wouldn't.
But that's kind of the point of this story. This is your childhood home.
Yes, it is.
And over there?
Where I first started school.
I've always been passionate about the younger generation hearing stories from the older generation. Do you mind crashing the school with me?
No, I'd love to go over.
I think they'll be really impressed. Did you ever go back there?
struck the officer. "Lead the men," the wounded man cried.
Miss Nielsen.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
How are you?
All right.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you. I'm Tony Robinson. I'm making a TV series here about the war. Does anybody know roughly when World War II started?
1939.
And it finished in?
1945.
Correct. Well, there was a boy who went to this school. He would have been sitting just like you're sitting here now, and he was in that war, and he had the most exciting job imaginable in that war, and his name is Don. Don, can you come in? Here he is. This is Don. Give him a big round of applause. Sit yourself down, Don. Are you all right with us taking over your class?
Feel free.
Sorry, suddenly your class has turned into a television show.
Exciting for us.
These Year 6 kids are about to do show and tell with a 90-year-old ex-spy with a real knack for disguising himself.
Well, when I joined up, and I joined up with my brother, my father said to me, "You know very well Peter can't you, and he's got a weak heart and he won't pass the test."
So, Don turned up at the medical centre with Peter, his identical brother. Look, they really were identical twins, weren't they? And you went in first?
I went in first, and the doctor checks you over, checks your heart, checks your height, notes the colour of your eyes.
And he said you were all right?
He said, "You're right, you're in."
And then you went out again?
So he said, "You've got a brother out there?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, we'll be calling him in about 5 minutes." So I went out quickly, and we went to the back of the hall. I took his coat and put it on, took his tie. I went in again. And the doctor looked at me, the colonel, he said, "Goodness me," he said, "you're the dead spit of your brother." I said, "We're twins, same height, same blue eyes." He checked my heart. He said, "Your heart's good." He said, "Peter, you're in too."
That's disgraceful. What kind of school would produce a man who would do something like that? Don and Peter went into intelligence. The work their unit did intercepting radio signals behind enemy lines in New Guinea was vital in helping crack Japanese codes.
General MacArthur, who was the Supreme Commander, said that our efforts during the war probably shortened the war by probably 2 years.
Wow. And that was because of the information
Yeah,
that
the
you
information
collected?
that was collected, yeah.
What would have happened to you if you'd been caught?
Oh, we'd have been tortured or tortured, I think. And we were told we weren't to be captured alive.
How would you have killed yourself?
On some missions, we were given a little pill to take.
A poison pill?
Yeah, poison pill, yeah.
Where did you keep it?
In the heel of my shoe.
And if you'd been captured, you'd have just gone like that?
Yeah. It screwed around, yeah. Fortunately, we never had to use it.
Now, one of the things that really intrigues me about what Don's just told you is that up to fairly recently, he'd never told anybody about what he did in the war. He kept it an absolute secret. Why was that?
Well, when we joined up in 1930 or 41, I think it was, and we were told that we were going to be in the intelligence unit, we had to sign a legal document which said that we weren't allowed to tell anyone what we did for 60 years.
Had to keep it a secret for 60
years. And my parents never knew what I did during the war.
What about your wife?
She didn't know till about 10 years ago.
Was she surprised?
She was, very surprised. Couldn't believe it. The only reason I told her was that I got in the post a letter from the Prime Minister of England and also sent me this gold medal.
So you finally got a medal after 60 years of secrecy?
We were told that we would get no recognition during the war, we'd get no medals, there'd be nothing. And this medal, simply on the back, it says, "We also served."
Have any of you got any questions that you would like to ask Don? Well, there's loads still for you to answer. I'm going to go off and continue with my walk now. I'll leave you here if that's all right?
Yeah.
Great to meet you all. Bye. The headmistress just said to me that children seldom remember specific geography lessons or history lessons or English lessons. But if a war hero comes to your school, especially one that used to go to that school, that's something they'll remember for the rest of their lives. Hopefully tomorrow's roadshow will be just as unforgettable.
I wonder what we'll find.
This is the part of the show that I've really been looking forward to, the Tour of Duty Roadshow, which this week is taking place in one of my favourite museums in the whole of Australia, the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery, or QV Mag, as they call it round here. This whole area used to be a swamp, and like most swamps, not many people wanted to live here, so it became the area where industry was created. Now, this place grew and grew and grew until by the Second World War, it was the biggest producer of munitions in the whole of Tasmania. Fantastically buzzy place, and hopefully some of that buzz is going to be recreated over the next couple of hours. I've spent the last few days going into Launceston to get the stories from local people. Now they're going to bring their stories to us. To my Tour of Duty Roadshow, and I know that you've brought an incredible amount of history with you today, and that is so important to us because you probably don't realise it, but a lot of the stories that you can tell us, the rest of Launceston doesn't know. It's also great to see so many young people here. A lot of kids will say, "Oh, history's boring, isn't it?" No, it's not! He likes it. We all know how exciting it is, and if in some way we can imbue that excitement onto the next generation, then I think we'll have done another service as well. Anyway, that's enough of me talking. There's so much to see. It's your stories that I want to hear, so let's get on with the show! Peter, ladies and gentlemen, this is just to say that I'm not going to do all of the work this afternoon. This is my friend Peter Stanley, Professor Peter Stanley from the University of New South Wales in Canberra. And you're a specialist in military history, aren't you?
Pretty much everything before 1945, I hope.
What is it that's going to really excite you today?
I've got to say, Tony, my interest at the moment is the Great War, the centenary that's on us now, and I'm looking for stories we haven't heard and feelings we've never seen before.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Get into the crowd, work the crowd.
Gal Valley?
Hey! Beat you, 1-0. Sorry, Isabella, I'll be with you in a minute. Hello.
I'm Maggie James.
Hi,
nice
Maggie.
to meet you,
Nice
Tony.
to meet you.
And I've got a story you may be interested in.
Yeah, tell me.
It's about my father. His name is Harvey Blackburn. And between the Boer War and he enlisted to go to the Great War, he worked here in these rail yards.
Yeah.
And he was an engine driver. And unfortunately, on a wet day, he slipped out of the engine and a train ran over his left foot and cut it off. Then he got called in. So he turned up for his medical and didn't say anything about his leg because by then he was wearing a prosthesis. Yeah. And the doctor said, examined him and said, "All right, now take off your trousers." He said, "No, mate." He said, I'm shy. He said, "I've got to see your legs, fella. Take down your trousers." So he turned around, fiddled with his pants, tucked out his right leg. He said, "Now the other leg." Went around, did the same thing, tucked out his right leg again. "All right, you're right." So off he went.
Did anybody realise when he was out in Europe that he'd lost his leg?
No, because he kept it a secret. Only the men in his tent knew about his prosthesis, you see. And he was a warrant sergeant. So he was able to avoid any more medicals during those 3 or so years he was away by just telling everybody else to go for a medical, and he never ever went for another one.
How wonderful to have a slightly dodgy hero in your family.
He was a larrikin.
Nice to meet you.
And you. Bye.
what's in the box?
Here I have the medals from my great-great-uncle, Lewis Mcgee.
Lewis Mcgee, VC.
Yes, yes, Peter.
Ralph, do you know, I've been a military historian for 34 years, and I think this is the first time that I've ever seen a VC this close, and it's the first time that I've been able to touch one. So while I put the gloves on, would you like to tell us the story of how Lewis Mcgee came to be awarded the Victoria Cross?
Yes, well, Lewis's platoon were under heavy fire in Belgium. He ran across open ground, armed only with a revolver, and took a machine gun post. And he was cited for bravery and was awarded the VC for that.
Of course, this is the highest decoration for gallantry awarded to soldiers and sailors and airmen from the British Empire. 100 Australians have won the Victoria Cross, and I'm astonished to say how light it is. There's a very weighty story there, but it's a very light piece of Russian bronze cannon. Now, I want to get an idea of Lewis Mcgee, the man. I notice you've got a letter there, and I see it's from the YMCA. May I have a look at that
Absolutely.
letter?
It's a copy of the letter. It was written about a year before he was killed in action.
And it's written to Eva, his wife?
Yes, his wife, yes.
He says he hopes he'll do all right. I wouldn't like to disgrace the name, so let us hope that I will keep my end up. And I think we can agree that he did.
Yes,
yeah. Ralph, thanks very much for showing us this.
Thank you.
Come over here. I've just bumped into this group of school students, all of whom, coincidentally, apparently are wearing these little circles here, the Frank McDonald Memorial Prize. Who was Frank McDonald?
He was Tasmania's last World War I veteran, so he won a military medal. His job was to repair signal lines during the war, and so he died at the ripe old age at 107.
And what's the Frank McDonald Memorial Prize?
It's basically an essay competition for grade 9 students around Tasmania that promotes like the Anzac spirit. And so we all write an essay, and then the 6 winners get to go on a pilgrimage, like a study tour to the Western Front.
What's this bizarre collection you got here?
Well, this is my great-great-uncle, Reuben Joseph Wolfe, who fought in World War I. It's all of his badges that he swapped, so the soldiers would swap badges with people from different countries.
Like football shirts?
Yeah, kind of like that, yeah. And so he swapped these and then brought them back and sewed them in the shape of Tasmania.
And was this his bugle?
And yes, it was. He played the bugle in the war.
Go on, James, have a go. Go on, have a go, see if you can make it. Yeah. Oh, fantastic! Well, have a great time, a brilliant thing to do. Thanks for coming along this afternoon. See you all. If you put Launceston, the QV mag, and a whole lot of history nuts together... Who's this one to? What do you get? A tour of Duty Roadshow, of course. Pretty spectacular, isn't it? Louise, what is this?
Tony, she's a bit gorgeous, isn't she?
Yeah, she's great.
She's a bit of a mystery to the museum. She came in at some stage, we don't know when she came in, but we were packing up a large collection to move, and she turned up. No information, no paperwork. So we just thought, well, we'll leave her in the store face out so people can see her, and one day maybe somebody will come along and go, I know who that is.
Well, that's what we've got Peter here for, isn't it? If he's around anywhere. Peter.
Tony, please.
What do you reckon on that?
I recognise it immediately. It's an American Red Cross poster from, I think, 1942, produced by the Red Cross to induce people to give money to the American Red Cross, and it must have been used by the Australian Red Cross for the same purpose.
You see, why didn't you just phone him and ask him?
Phone a friend.
We did wonder whether it was used for fundraising.
Yeah. The thing is, you have to know which poster. And in fact, the poster it's based on, Head and Shoulders Only, is of a nurse. There's more in the background. But that's definitely the poster on which this is based.
So this presumably would be an Australian Red Cross initiative to try and raise more money.
That's right, but it's absolutely an American nurse.
Yeah. That's fabulous.
You can imagine a collection box, a donation box next to it.
Yeah,
I'd give her a few bucks.
Put your hand in your pocket now.
Yeah. There we are. Now we'll be able to...
That's brilliant. Yeah.
To give its provenance.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you very much.
That's what we're here for, isn't it? Thanks, mate.
Thank you.
Cheers. afternoon. I hear you've got an interesting book to show us.
This is a book, it's a poetry book. It's called Singing Bird and Battlefield.
Yeah.
And it was written by Bernard J. Archer, late AIF. Printed in 1918 by the Examiner.
And what's inside it?
Inside here, and this was by his sister, it was signed in 1918.
Yeah.
And there's a picture of him, Bernard Archer.
Who was he?
Well, he was my adopted mother's brother. He was 17 in 1914, and it said, young Archer flung away his school books and went and joined the AIF.
So what is the stuff that he was writing?
Oh, he was called the soldier poet.
Have a go on this one?
Yeah, sure.
So this is a poem called Victory, about the end of the First World War, by Bernard Archer. The winter clouds have rolled away and summer sun streams down once more. The brightness of its slanting ray has cast my sorrows on before. I walk the western battlefield, the enemies but yesterday. How many here their lives have sealed to rest in peace this sunny day? With death and ruin all around, what is it makes me joyful be? Why do the trumpets loudly sound? 'Tis battle won, 'tis victory. It's lovely, isn't it? A beautiful poem. Thank you for that, Jim.
I'm really glad I have it.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Tom, what have you got in your little box?
Well, Tony, what I've got in here are a number of badges and bits and pieces that were issued to servicemen and other people in relation to the First World War.
And what is this one?
That's a widow's badge. They were brought out at the end of the war and they were given to the mothers of those servicemen who'd been killed. If you had more than one killed, they gave you more stars.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? So you would wear this as a widow, as it were.
Oh, yes.
Just to demonstrate the sacrifice that you'd made.
The purpose of them was that everybody had to be able to demonstrate to society what part they'd played in the war, in the war effort. So there was not only that, but there were a number of other badges as well.
The idea that in war that you would actually wear something to show your status as someone who was bereaved, it seems very strange to us, very almost Victorian, isn't it?
It was, but it wasn't just Australia that did it. All Germany, France, the United States, Britain, all had badges like this, and it was all done so people's service could be recognised. There's more than just that, though, because that one there, that's an unusual one. At the end of the war in 1917, 1918, when they were really struggling to get people to enlist, they came up with this bizarre idea of having a ballot. And so what you would do is you would agree to put your name down, and then if your number was drawn out, you went into the army.
Yeah.
Or the
and
Navy,
that's what
or whatever.
the B stands for.
And the B stands for ballot.
You won the ballot.
Now, they are very rare.
Such a gorgeous treasure trove, that. Don't forget to give them back, all right? I'll leave you to share them with them.
Thank you.
That's an intriguing little book there.
Yes, Tony. Yes, got it from my grandfather. And when he was in Gallipoli, he got shot over there and he had to go back to London, where they used to take him. Then they shipped him up to Sutton Venie in the hospital. And then he was travelling back on the train and he pulled out this notebook and this bullet fell out. And he didn't realise he'd been shot.
Oh, I see. The bullet had gone through the book.
Yeah, right through the book.
Wow.
Yeah, right through the
there's
postcards.
the hole there.
Yep, some of his girlfriends.
Yeah. Well,
but,
he was lucky he had so many girlfriends.
Well, I think they did over there those days.
Another one there.
Straight through. And then it just rolled out through the hole and landed
Yes, because
there.
it doesn't go through there, does it?
No, it just landed.
Look, it nearly went through there.
That's it.
And that protected him, and he never knew.
No.
How many weeks later do you think it was when he first discovered that?
I'm not sure, because he didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
They never did in those days. Yeah, it was interesting.
What a bizarre story.
Yeah,
the little book that saved his life.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's where it went in.
Yeah, it went in there.
But it never came out.
No.
Oh, thanks for that. That is some story.
That slowed it all down. Yeah, unbelievable. Thanks, mate.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Oh. Well, that's just about it. I've had a great afternoon. Have you enjoyed yourselves? Yeah! Have you learnt anything? Yeah! Oh, that's what it's all about, isn't it? You know, all the wonderful things that you've shown us, all the great stories that you've told us this afternoon, the one thing that sticks in my mind more than anything else was that lovely poem. A square of graves upon the rise show those who fighting paid the price. And like the flower whose beauty dies, in glory lives their sacrifice. With death and ruin all around, what is it makes me joyful be? Why do the trumpets loudly sound? 'Tis battle won, 'tis victory. And it reminds me that Tasmania has always punched above its weight in time of war. And I tell you what, you've certainly punched above your weight this afternoon. Thanks for having us. Goodbye.
Thank you.